On the world today, U.S. President Donald Trump and Democratic challenger Joe Biden face each other in a final debate before the November 3rd presidential election. Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu addresses Lagosians after a tour of damages inflicted on public and private infrastructure by hoodlums. Plus, Libya's warring factions sign an agreement on a permanent ceasefire following days of talks in Geneva. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers. We begin today with news just in. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that Sudan and Israel have agreed to the normalization of relations. Mr. Trump spoke with the leaders of Israel and Sudan as the two countries announced their plan to normalize ties, adding that he expected the Palestinians and other nations, including Saudi Arabia, to also agree to closer ties in the coming months. In a telephone call with Mr. Trump held in front of reporters at the White House, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also welcomed what he called a rapidly expanding circle of peace. We'll have more details as soon as we get them. Now, to the final debate before the U.S. presidential election, where Mr. Donald Trump and his Democratic challenger Joe Biden both clashed over COVID-19 and race while trading corruption charges against each other. Let's take a listen.
The U.S. President Donald Trump and his Democratic challenger Joe Biden both came on stage for the final debate ahead of the November 3rd election. Rules for the debate in Nashville had changed, with each candidate allotted 2 minutes to respond to each question. And during that time, the debate staff would mute the microphone of the candidate who is not speaking. After the 4 minutes of the relative quiet, it may be a free-for-all once again. And the debate got off to a quick start with the coronavirus pandemic.
I say we're learning to live with it. We have no choice. We can't lock ourselves up in a basement like Joe does. He has the ability to lock himself up. I don't know. He's obviously made a lot of money someplace, but he has this thing about living in a basement. People can't do that.
He says that we're learning to live with it. People are learning to die with it. You folks home will have an empty chair at the kitchen table this morning. That man or wife going to bed tonight and reaching over to try to touch out of habit where their wife or husband is gone. Learning to live with it. Come on. We're dying with it.
President Trump has said that they should pay.
Trump repeated his accusation that Biden and his son, Hunter, engaged in unethical practices in China and Ukraine. No evidence has been verified to support the allegations, and Biden called them false and discredited.
Air Force Two, number one. Number two.
Trump's effort to uncover dirt on Hunter Biden's Ukraine business ties led to the president's impeachment.
There's a reason why he's bringing up all this malarkey. There's a reason for it. He doesn't want to talk about the substantive issues. It's not about his family and my family. It's about your family. And your family's hurting badly. If you're a middle-class family, you're getting hurt badly right now. You're sitting at the kitchen table this morning deciding, well, we can't get new tires, they're bald because we have to wait another month or so. Or are we going to be able to pay the mortgage? Or who's going to tell her she can't go back to community college? They're the decisions you're making in the middle-class families like I grew up in Scranton and Claymont. They're in trouble. We should be talking about your families, but that's the last thing he wants to talk about.
Joe Biden attacked President Trump over his close relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, a relationship Donald Trump defended.
In the meantime, I have a very good relationship with him. Different kind of a guy, but he probably thinks the same thing about me. We have a different kind of a relationship. We have a very good relationship, and there's no war. And about 2 months ago, he broke into a certain area. They said, oh, there's going to be trouble. I said, no, they're not, because he's not going to do that. And I was right. Look, instead of being in a war where millions of people, Seoul, is 25 miles away.
Meanwhile, President Trump had his microphone muted at some point before he finished his sentence, but praised NBC News correspondent Kristen Welker's moderation of the debate.
You would be able to rein in this persistent threat
Because I'd make it clear.
Though Trump trails Biden significantly in national polls, the contest is much tighter in some battleground states where the election will likely be decided.
And in fact, if you remember the first 2 or 3 months, there was a very dangerous period in my first 3 months before we sort of...
And what a night it was yesterday. Let's talk to our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird. Maria, thanks for joining us today. I want to begin to look at this from the outside in. Millions of people around the world watched the final debate last night. What do you think may have resonated the most from the various topics discussed?
Well, thank you for having me. And you're exactly right. Last night's debate resonated with so many Americans and was one that I think allowed them to hear what the real issues are, to hear President Trump's opinion on issues such as climate change, his stance on healthcare, his stance on COVID-19, and to clearly, many people have been pushing to have a debate that would really deal with the issues, one that people are used to seeing. And so I think last night allowed both Democrat candidate Joe Biden and President Trump to be able to address some of the issues. Now, many were not happy with some of the response that came from either candidate. But again, I think that we were able to at least see questions being asked. It was much more of a debate that allowed for dialogue, more so than some of the screaming and ranting that went on during the first debate. And so, but the real question is it going to change the mind of any voter? And many Americans have already voted. We've had record numbers of Americans going out to early vote, absentee ballot voting, mail-in voting. And so many have already made up their mind. The real question at this time is going to be, are those Americans that are on the fence going to now vote for President Trump? And I think that many people are just not sure where we're going to end up with this election. They're stating that presidential candidate Joe Biden has a lead in some areas, but we saw that in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. And we all know that President Trump ended up winning that election. So the question is, are some of these indicators going to play out when we get to November 3rd, which is a little less than about 11 days away?
Right, so on the issue of foreign policy, Maria, the question surrounded Russia, President Trump's relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and even the Iran nuclear deal. Both candidates are usually on opposing sides on this topic. However, there's no mention of Africa or America's foreign policy towards the continent or its biggest partners here. What happened?
Yes. And you're exactly right. And I think that was the question yesterday evening. It was, you heard a lot about very domestic issues, but where President Trump has struggled throughout his administration is foreign policy. And you mentioned, very clearly, Africa, the largest continent and one that has been a strong ally of the U.S. for many years, was not part of the conversation. And we all know that there are many, many, many years of relationship there. And so I think that Americans are going to begin to ask those questions. But unfortunately, America's in a time where there's so much economic devastation, a real health crisis, that I think that was some of the reason for the very domestic focus of last night's conversation.
Even though some votes are already in, as you mentioned earlier, but do you think this debate could just in any way help tip the tide in any direction for either candidate at the polls?
Yes. Is it going to tip the tide? What it might do is it potentially could get more voters out. President Trump, many people were saying that he looked a little stronger yesterday. He looked, more presidential. So that might help with some of his base. But again, his base has already made a decision. The question is, are some of the members of his base going to actually now come out? And so him looking stronger and looking more presidential might have people decide not to come out to the polls. Maybe they'll feel that he already has it in the bag. But I think many Democrats, I think the Democratic Party has really focused on galvanizing the communities and getting those grassroots efforts in place. And so you'll probably begin to see many Democrats or those who are going to be voting for Joe Biden first-time voters, those who haven't voted in years, coming out, because I think that there has been enough concern in the Democratic Party that people are going to come out to vote to ensure that their candidate gets the appropriate voices heard.
Well, thank you for that. Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, giving us more details about that hot debate last night between U.S. President Donald Trump and his challenger from the Democratic Party, Joe Biden. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the stage former Vice President Joe Biden and President Donald J. Trump.
Well, supporters of Democratic candidate Joe Biden cheered on, as you can see there, as he debated President Donald Trump. A small crowd gathered outside a cafe in Nashville, a few miles from where the debate was holding. Tennessee is a reliably Republican state, meaning that there's very little chance that its electoral college votes will go towards electing a Democrat.
4 years ago, I got in a voting booth, flipped a coin, made a decision that will probably haunt me for the rest of my life. Landed Trump, voted Trump. Didn't really care. I thought, what the worst it could do. 4 years later, I'm hosting a Biden-Harris watch party. That's the answer to that question. That's the worst it could do. Like, it made me drop my...
Well, the VOA's Caroline Priscitti joins us from Nashville, Tennessee. Caroline, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Jack. Good to see you.
Right, good evening. So let's begin with a general view of how things went last night. This was a debate like no other, I must say. Talk to us about the changes made to the model and how this impacted on the final presidential debate.
Well, certainly we did have new rules, right? And that made all the difference in the world. What was a chaotic debate less than a month ago became a calm, informative debate last night here in Nashville because the microphone was muted for the first 2 minutes of each candidate as they answered the question. And then once that 2 minutes was up, then it was a free-for-all and you had that discussion. But I don't know about you, but as soon as I heard that first question answered by President Trump and then by former Vice President Biden, it was obvious that it was going to be a much more civilized debate, and we got a lot more out of it. There were all kinds of tweets today commending the moderator and the fact that the microphones were muted, saying that the American public won this election because we actually heard more substance to it than the other debate.
So I'm not sure if there was anything new mentioned last night because the questions sounded very familiar, except now we know the drug remdesivir has been approved by the U.S. Drug Authority for treatment of COVID-19.
And of course, that's the same drug that President Trump took when he had COVID. And he made a point of making that a very personal answer when he was asked about the COVID deaths. He said, you know, I can speak personally now. I had it, and COVID is over. It's gone. And of course, that's when the former vice president jumped in, and Biden said, wait a second, 220,000 deaths in this country. Anyone who doesn't take responsibility for that doesn't deserve to be president of the United States of America. At which point, the president did take responsibility. He said, I take full responsibility, but it's not my fault. China is to blame. So he took responsibility, and then he shifted the blame to China. So that's kind of how that went with the COVID. And, that took up a good third of the entire debate time. They talked about COVID for the first 30 minutes of the debate. And I can tell you this, just talking to voters here and in many states around this country, that is their number one concern in this election, the coronavirus. The second concern is the economy. And of course, those two are connected. You can see behind me, this is known as Music City, USA, Nashville. And a lot of these independent music venues have suffered a lot of a business downturn because of the restrictions from COVID, and they're struggling. You can hear the music behind me. They're going full force now, but here they have to close at 11. None of them allowed to be open past 11 o'clock, so that's really cutting into their bottom line.
Right, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. The VOA's Caroline Priscitti reporting from Nashville for The World Today. Still to come on the program. The WHO reports new record daily rise of COVID-19. That's in a moment. Do stay with us. Welcome back. After embarking on an extensive tour of Lagos State to ascertain the level of destruction during the Lagos protests, the governor, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, says he's deeply pained by the level of damage to government and private infrastructure. After a briefing at the State House, in Marina, the governor says 120 BRT buses and a first-class terminal were among the infrastructure destroyed by hoodlums, alongside the looting of private businesses in major commercial areas. He says the NSAS panel of inquiry will be sitting on Monday and the government is easing the statewide curfew as people are now allowed to go about their businesses between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. He also assures that government will pick up the bill of all wounded protesters and that the cleanup of Lagos will begin tonight.
We've decided that we're going to be easing the curfew from tomorrow morning. And so what that easing means is people will be allowed to go out from 8 a.m. in the morning till 6 p.m. in the evening. For emphasis, from 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, you will be allowed to go out, to go to wherever you wish, till 6 p.m. in the evening. We have also commenced the cleanup of the city because the city needs a whole lot of cleanup. A whole lot of roadblocks, tires burnt on the road. And so Loma, like you've seen, are out already. And so they'll be working all throughout the night. But in the event that they do not finish, I want to admonish and appeal to motorists and our citizens to be careful on the road. Please, if you do not need to go out, please stay at home. But if you must and you have to go out, please drive with a lot of caution because there's still a lot of barricades, there's still a lot of burnt tires that will have broken bottles and broken things here and there. So please be careful while you're on the road. We will try and clean up the city overnight. They are out already. We've pushed all of the men and women of Loma. They are out already doing the cleaning. But in the event that they do not have the capacity to clean it up fully overnight, I'm just advising all of us to just drive cautiously. We will look at the curfew on Saturday and Sunday, and we'll come back to you what will happen in the days, Mondays and Tuesdays and into the week.
Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu speaking about the damages to public and private infrastructure in the aftermath of the violence of the NSAS protests. In other news, Libya's warring factions have signed an agreement on a permanent ceasefire at the end of their talks in Geneva. The United Nations Acting Special Envoy for Libya, Stephanie Williams, describes the accord as a crucial sign of hope for the Libyan people. Addressing the ceremony, Ms. Williams adds that the hard work ahead will be implementing the terms of the agreement. The internationally recognized Libyan government in the capital Tripoli and General Khalifa Haftar's faction in Benghazi have signed several ceasefire deals since the toppling of Colonel Gaddafi in 2011.
Today is a good day for the Libyan people. At 11:15 a.m. this morning, here in the UN headquarters in Geneva, the two Libyan delegations to the 5+5 Joint Military Commission talks signed a complete, countrywide, and permanent ceasefire agreement with immediate effect. The agreement was facilitated by the United Nations, and we signed it as witnesses. What they have accomplished here today took a great deal of courage. They demonstrated their patriotism, love of country, and commitment in coming together to reach an agreement that can help secure a better and more peaceful future for all of the Libyan people.
And finally on the program, the World Health Organization has reported a new daily rise of 41.1 million global COVID-19 cases. The organization's dashboard on Thursday showed the cumulative death toll had reached 1.1 million. The previous record daily rise of coronavirus cases was 412,889. Here's the global update.
Russia's daily tally of new coronavirus cases hit a record high of 17,340 on Friday, including 5,478 in Moscow, taking the national tally to 1,480,646 since the pandemic began. Authorities say 283 people died in the last 24 hours, bringing the official death toll to 25,525. Russia has started opening temporary clinics and repurposing hospitals in the capital to cope with the rising numbers of coronavirus patients. And in Belgium, one of the European countries worst hit by the new coronavirus, on Friday tightened restrictions on social contacts by banning fans from sports matches, limiting the number of people in cultural spaces, and closing theme parks. The restrictions, running until November 9, also include stricter social distancing. They are intended to avoid crowding on public transport and impose a limit of 200 people in theaters, concert halls, and cinemas. France's Prime Minister says the country will widen its coronavirus curfew to more than two-thirds of its population, adding a warning that time is running out to slow the spread of infection and avoid even tougher measures. He also says the nightly curfew will be extended from main cities to an additional 38 administrative departments and would now impact a total of 46 million people and include some overseas territories. Meanwhile, the total number of COVID-19 cases in the United States has surpassed 8.4 million, according to the Center for Systems Science and Engineering at Johns Hopkins University. The country's cumulative case count reached 8,404,528, including a death toll of 222,977, with the U.S. outspacing other countries in the number of reported cases as well as the death toll.
Well, that's it on The World Today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jokia Rogers.